Hi there, welcome back. I think it's only right to start with an apology, and that apology is going to be because this video is going to be quite long, but don't worry, in the video description and in the pinned comment on YouTube or Odyssey, you'll find timestamps. So just scroll down to whatever you're interested in, hit the timestamp and you'll jump straight there. Failing that, on YouTube, I'm not sure about Odyssey, but on YouTube, along the bottom of the player, there's like a progress bar. You can skip along there as well. That should be divided up into chapters for easy navigation. In this little bag, I've got 8 different methods of catching fish, which are commonly available online on eBay, Amazon, all sorts of like outdoor survival shops. Even in the likes of Go Outdoors, you may find some of these sorts of things. So I think we'll start first with just a rundown of exactly what is going to be tested, and then I'll explain why I'm doing the testing. In fact, I'll explain why I'm making this video first, I think, because that's probably the most important thing. I'm making this video because there's just so much gear out there, and a lot of it is good, a lot of it requires some sort of skill to use, and there's quite a lot of it isn't very good at all. So if you're relying on that in a survival situation, the gear might let you down, and I don't want that to happen to you guys. So I've taken the liberty of buying pretty much everything out there that's available, with a few notable exceptions, which I might get to later. I've been using these for, I don't know, 4-5 years maybe, on my local river, in my own pond, in little streams and so on, and I've selected 8 or 10 different criteria to judge them on. Because there's 8 of them, I've assigned a score of between 1 and 8, 1 being the best and 8 being the worst. And then at the end, once I've charted all that out, I've given it a total. So the one with the lowest score would be the best, and the one with the highest score would be the worst. And I can tell you now, the one that came bang last really surprised me. I didn't, well, I don't know, you'll see it. I'll put a photo of that chart at the end of the video, and it'll also be in the timestamps as well. It's in a couple of different orientations, so just pause the screen and zoom in if you can, and have a look at that for yourself and see what you think. Those are the criteria that are pretty important to me. They might not be important to you, but that's what I've judged this stuff on. And I have extensive notes for this video because I don't want to make an arse of it. And it's going to be pretty much an afternoon's investment to make it, so I don't want it to do twice. Now, some of these fishing implements are in little bags or cases with a load of fishing gear, and that's how I would generally carry them, so I may as well show you that. I have done videos in the past showing those different setups, so I'll put the links to those in the video description as well. But here I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of exactly what these things are and why I picked them. Okay, so the first implement that I've gone with is that. Now, anybody into bushcraft or survival will recognise that. It's been turned out on a lathe, and I think this particular one maybe looks like it's made from either ash or beech, which is a sort of wood we get here in the UK. It's got a cork in the end, and the internals of it have been hollowed out. That allows you to put hooks and weights and, you know, maybe small floats in there. It's got the line wound on here, and it's secured with an elastic band. Basically, you just unwind a little bit of line, throw it out whilst pointing this forward, and it flies out, and then you just reel it in like that. If you've seen my video on the K-Bar Kaster, which is a plastic version of this, which we'll get to later, you'll see me using that, and it's pretty easy to use, pretty cheap as well. I think this one was around about 10 English pounds, and they range anywhere from like 10 English pounds, maybe up to 30 for the really nice looking ones, possibly made out of oak. You know, generally the better the wood and the bigger they are, the more they cost. Secondly, we've got the aforementioned K-Bar Kaster from, oh god, what are they called? From K-Bar, yeah. The K-Bar Kaster is basically an updated plastic, like a hard plastic version of the Hobo Handline. I've wrapped paracord around the handle just to make it a little bit bigger, and also to give me some paracord should I ever need it. The top twists off like so, and then in there I've got all sorts of stuff. Again, I'll direct you to the video that I made specifically about this, but it does hold a lot of stuff, way more than that. And that top fits on there beautifully. It's got a clip here which holds the line on, and you can also attach the hook, which I've left fitted to the line, on there. K-bar caster. And as far as I can remember, the K-bar caster was around about 25 English pounds. Because it's an American product, you guys in the US might get this considerably cheaper. Now the third one is called a Yoyito handline, and this is very similar to Cuban style handlines, and it's basically just a piece of machined aluminium, beautifully made by the way, but pretty expensive. I think I paid roughly 55 English pounds for this, which a lot of people might think is crazy, but I needed to test it, so hence it got bought. And that is a very simple reel, similar to what you'd buy in the UK for something called crabbing, except they'd be like big plastic versions. But this one is sold more for kind of survival and bushcraft use. It's got holes in there that you put your fingers through to hold it. I've added a little wrist strap that goes around here just to stop it being pulled off and ending up at the bottom of a river. And I've left that one set up with a little grub as well. And I do like to leave a lot of these little things set up. And I'll get to why that is in a moment. I've married that reel up with this little barnacle pouch from Maxpedition, and it holds all sorts in there. I recently made a video, which again I will link to in the video description. And to cast with this one, we need to just unravel a bit of line, point this thing forward, throw it out, turn it sideways, and then reel it in. You can see it's angled on one side to make it easier to reel in, so you don't miss the spool, you know, it widens the top of it, and it also helps the line to fly off faster. And I've got all sorts in this bag, as you'll see in the video that I'll link to in the video description, including a pair of forceps, so I can easily get the hook out of the fish's mouth. Ooh, now the next one is a very small 3D printed Hobo Handline sort of a thing. And as you see, that one's got a little grub on as well. Same sort of thing, it's got a little, you know, indentation, it's neck down to take the line. This one has got a cork on the end, and inside you've got a little cavity with all your gear, which I've got in small plastic bags just to stop it falling all over the place, you know. That is unusual. I thought I would include it because you do see these things popping up from time to time. And if you've got, or you know someone who's got a 3D printer, you might be able to get plans for one of these on the internet and produce it yourself very, very cheaply. So that's why I included this one, because it works, it's cheap, and it's pretty good. I think I only paid about 5 English pounds for this, but I just cannot find them anywhere now to put a link to, so just keep an eye out for something like that. Now the next one on the list is the X-Reel from Exotac, and this is absolutely a vision of beauty. I did make a specific video about this, and you'll see it in the video description. I was very impressed with this when I first got it, balls, but as you can see, the line doesn't stay on here very well, which makes it difficult to reel back in, and therefore, I don't know. You'll see how this one scored later on. It's got a rubbery handle on the back, and the rest of this thing is made from aluminium. It's got a removable cover or lid, which is a screw thread attachment, and then you've got all your gear in there. Exquisitely produced, and I love the design of this, apart from one thing which lets it down, which we'll get to later on. Now you'll see all of this stuff in the specific video I did on this. Again, it's linked in the video description, but in this little hard case I've got all sorts of survival gear and fishing gear. I like to make up little kits, as you've probably gathered. And as you saw, that one again was set up ready for use. Ooh. Now the cost, it was about 90 English pounds at the time when I bought it. In fact, I think they maybe had a 20% sale off. So, well, it was still a lot of money when I bought it. It's definitely the most expensive item we're going to be looking at today. Now this next one, I was hoping to have the original version of this, but unfortunately it didn't transpire. This is what's known as a pen rod. This isn't the proper pen rod. Not the original one anyway, not the official one. It's basically just a very small rod, again probably about 1 meter long, and you attach a reel to here, and when it folds down very, very small. Everything is contained in there, so it's well protected. Now the reel that I've married this one to is in here, which is again another little hard case. I think headphones came in this case or something. And that is the fly reel. These are pretty difficult to find online, but again, I do have them linked, and I have made a video specifically on this setup. And I went for the fly reel version and loaded it with just ordinary nylon. I think it's £6 nylon, because the spinning reel versions of these like little fake pen rods are generally fairly crap, and the multiplier or bait caster type reels that come with them are atrocious, really, really bad, so avoid those at all costs. In here we've got floats, hooks, weights, artificial grubs, all this stuff that I've got in the other kits, and that's what this particular kit comprises of. Pretty small. And if anybody's wondering how you use it, if you didn't want to look at the video that I've made previously, you basically use it like a what we would call a centre pin reel in the UK. You would strip the line off, grab it, strip more off, grab it, strip more off, grab it, so you ended up with loops of line in your hand, and then you just flick the rod and let the line go, and the line would shoot through the rings and it would go out. It's got a reasonable casting distance. Unfortunately, I can't find a small enough fly line to use with this, otherwise I probably would have set it up as a fly rod and given that a go. That might come in the future. I think the cost of the rod and reel, oh god, is somewhere between 10 to 12 English pounds maybe. Pretty cheap option. It's good to use as well. I enjoy using that. Now the next one is probably something that a lot of people watching this will be more familiar with. And it's basically a very small spinning reel, like that, and a tiny telescopic rod. Now this is actually the cheapest, smallest telescopic rod that I could find on eBay. I think it cost me about £4.90 delivered from China, and it actually works pretty well. It folds down to approximately 11 inches, and it's got a pretty well made reel seat attachment there, so that just attaches, well, you know how a rod and reel attaches. You know, if you're watching this, at the very least you've used the rod and reel. It's a simple thing, and this one casts the furthest. The cost of it was, oh god, what was it? I think the reel was maybe somewhere between 10 to 12 English pounds, and the rod was roughly a £5, so just under 20 English pounds for this kit. It might have gone up since I bought it though. And then the last one is in here, and it isn't the Yoyito reel which we took a look at before. This is the bag that the Yoyito reel comes in, which is a neoprene bag. But in here we've got something called a yo-yo reel. And I'll show you how this one works later on, because this probably will be one that people can't work out for themselves and really has to be shown to be explained. In this little bag I've actually got 2 of these, along with some artificial lures, hooks, weights, no floats. and I'll explain why that is later on. Again, these two come set up. And that completes the kit that I've been testing over the last 4 or 5 years, possibly, well, with the small rods, even longer than that. So I've used them in pretty much all sorts of situations to catch a nation of fish. They all work to some degree. Now to the subject of why I leave some of these things set up, and that's because most of this stuff is actually just stored in my various packs, like bug out bags, or general like overnight sort of things, or in the car, or even just in my little backpack that I take when I go fly fishing. Because if there's a fish that's in a very difficult place to get, and I literally just have to throw a line and watch a float go down, I don't really want to do that with a fly rod. I like to try and practice with these fellas, so I'm always practicing. Added to that, if you find yourself in some sort of survival situation and you lose the use of an arm or a hand, some of these can be used one-handed, and if they're already set up, it means all you have to do is just take the hook out of its holder, unravel a bit of line, throw it out, and even if you're just, reeling it in with one hand, not on the reel, you can still catch fish. So I call it the scouse method, because when you open it, it just says, hey, I'm made up, I'm made up. Enough of that nonsense. I'll explain the criteria that all these things have been judged on this rather messy chart that I've made up. First one is cost. That's a consideration, because no matter how well something works, if it's out of your price range, you're never going to buy it. Now the second thing is time it takes to catch fish. So the likes of the small telescopic rod, if you have that set up and you're just walking up a river and say you've got a spinner on or something like that, you see a fish, you can literally just unhook the spinner, chuck it out, wow, bang, you're straight into a fish. You can land it quickly, and then you can get that lure back out again to catch another fish. So the likes of that would score well. After I've explained all the various criteria, I'll go through them one at a time and I'll give you the scores that I've assigned for them. This is purely my experience. You guys may have a different experience. You may agree, you might not. It doesn't matter. This is just my experience for the benefit of you guys. Next is ease of playing fish. So again, the likes of the small telescopic rod, you've got a drag on that reel. The chances are when you hook a fish, you're not going to lose it. Some of these things are a little bit more difficult, especially if you're trying to play them on the reel. The likes of that Yoyito reel or the Cuban handline, you often miss, so that can cause the line to go slack, and I've lost fish on a lot of these things, so that's why I included that. Cast distance, again, some things scored very well, some didn't. A lot of the handlines are pretty much of a muchness. Some do throw a little bit further than others, but there's not much in it when it comes to them. Pack space with the necessary gear to catch fish. So the smaller the reel, i.e. that, the less space it'll take up in your pack. And you've got everything inside of here to catch fish. So the likes of that would score very well. Again, the likes of your telescopic rod, reel, plus all the other gear, maybe wouldn't score so well. Now the next one is lifespan. And lifespan takes into account obviously how long this thing is expected to last, and also how easy it is to break it. So the more moving parts it has, the lower it's scored. The likes of the yo-yo reel is spring loaded. There's always a chance that spring will go and render that thing pretty much useless. Likewise, the reel, the rod, you might snap rings, which makes it difficult to cast. You might break the reel seat, which means that you've got to tape the reel onto the rod or something, the more complicated something is, and really the poorer the materials are, the less it's going to last. Now, next one is a pretty important one, and that is skill to use effectively. Some of these things might seem easy to use, but there are definite techniques to using them. So that pretty much explains itself. You know, you need more practice to use some of them effectively than you do with the other ones. I mean, well, I'll explain it in a bit. Ooh, the next one is stealth. Now that is stealth during use. So, you know, do you have to hold something out here and throw it hard to get it to go a distance? You know, the likes of a lot of the hand reels. That kind of, you know, it shows movement. So anybody looking for your fishing is going to notice that movement. So the less movement that you need to do to get the bait out there, the higher it's going to score. And also, as far as concealment goes, if you are out for a walk somewhere, you fancy fishing, someone sees you, can you just put one of these things in your pocket and hide it? So that was also part of the stealth criteria. Next one is versatility, and relates to how many different types of baits, spinners, lures can be used effectively with each one of these fishing implements. So that covers ledgered bait, which is basically a hook with a worm or an artificial grub on with a weight that you just chuck out and leave or bring back very, very slowly. A spinner, and bear in mind some of these things just do not work with spinners because you need to bring them back quickly, and if you're missing the reel, the spinner's going to sink to the bottom and you're going to lose it. So some things that I enjoy using didn't score highly with that. And also floated bait, so that is just your bait suspended under a float, which is how I have a lot of these things set up. The very last thing is, how easy is it to strike into the fish when it takes? That's important, because if you can't strike the hook, if you can't set the hook effectively, the fish is going to be very lightly hooked, or it's just going to get off altogether. It's just going to get away, you know. So the likes of a standard rod and reel, obviously if you're bringing something back slowly, a fish takes, bang, you're straight into it. You can strike it very quickly and very effectively. If you've got some of the hand lines, you know, you've got it out here, and you've kind of got to go with both hands like that to strike, which isn't good. Unless you're using a ledgered bait maybe, and you've got your hand reel in one hand and your line in the other hand, and you feel a tug and you can literally just pull the line as if you were striking it on a rod. So some are easier to strike, some are not easy to strike with. So I'll highlight each one of the fishing implements and I'll give the scores across the board, because it's going to be easier that way to explain why I've assigned that particular score for that particular product. And remember, a score of 1 is the best, a score of 8 is the worst. So first up, Hobo Handline. Cost, I've given it a 3 because it is towards the cheaper end of this gear, and it's available all over the internet as well. Time it takes to catch fish, well, if you've got this ready set up, all you need to do is just unhook your line, throw it out, and then you can start bringing it in. So that's pretty quick. I gave that one a 4. Ease of playing fish, because that is pretty wide, you don't often miss the reel, and if you hold it like that, it acts as a bit of a buffer, so you can play them on here effectively, because a lot of the other things you can play equally as good or better. I've given that a 5. Cast distance, again, I've given that a 5 because it's, you know, somewhere in the middle. Not the furthest, certainly not the worst. Pack space with gear, well, that's pretty much it. Doesn't take up much space, just doesn't hold much gear, so that kind of counts against it a little bit. Again, that's got a 5. I've given a lot of 5s to this particular thing. Lifespan, again, I've given a 5. The wood, especially if it's oiled, is going to last you pretty much forever. The cork might end up rotten. It's easy to get another cork or just whittle a piece of wood to bang in there, so that's a pretty long-term solution. That's got a 5 because some of the things will last longer. Skill to use effectively, again, is a 5. How many 5s have I given this? Bloody hell, most of its scores are 5. Again, I've given pretty easy to use, but some things are more effective whilst they're a little bit more difficult to use, so the effectiveness of them kind of counteracts how easy they are to use, because once you know how to use something, it becomes more effective and you become more effective. Did I mention that was a 5? I might have done, I don't know, but skill to use effectively is given a 5. Concealment. With this, when you're using it, you need to kind of hold it out that way, throw your arm like that, so if somebody's got a particularly good eye, even if you're well hidden, chances are you're going to be seen, but if somebody then challenges you, this will easily go in your pocket, so it scores pretty well for that. I gave it a 3. Versatility goes for ledgered bait. You basically just chuck it out and leave it, so it's pretty good for that. Spinner, it's not too bad because you've got that wide area there where the line reels onto. That enables you to actually use this thing with a spinner. And floated bait, again, it's pretty much the same as ledgered bait. You'd just be reeling it in very slowly and then striking. And talking of, where are we? Versatility, I gave a 4. Pretty good. And ease of striking with this, got this in one hand and the line in another hand, it's not that easy to strike. You know, if you're actually reeling it in slowly in a fish toop, you've got to use both hands. So I gave that, you've guessed it, a 5. Total for that was 44 out of 80. And remember, the higher the score, the less well it did. So the lower the score, the better it did. K-bar Kaster. Now this is basically just a slightly bigger version of the Hobo Handline, but it's plastic, so it ain't gonna rot. It's got a similar size area to reel onto, and the sides are also raised a little bit as well, so you tend not to miss when you're reeling it in. It holds a lot of gear. You know, I might as well lay it on the line now. This is my personal favourite to use because it holds a lot of gear. I can use it for any sort of bait or spinner, and it doesn't take up that much space. Plus, that makeshift strap that I've got on there is really handy. It just fits well. It just feels nice to use this. Cost-wise, it's towards the higher end of the things we're testing. That scored is 6. Time it takes to catch anything, I've scored this pretty well actually. I've scored it at 3. Just because it's, I don't know, it just seems a nice, quick, easy one to use. Even if you're using spinners, you know, as long as you've got a constant retrieve, you can catch fish pretty easy with this. And it's, I don't know, I gave it a 3. Ease of playing fish, again, because you've got that reasonably large area to wind onto, and it fits well in your hand at a good angle. I've scored that one a 4. Casting distance, again, I've scored a 4. It's not the best, it's not the worst, but the line does fly off here very, very well. Oh, and I will say that I've got the same break and strain line on all of this gear, apart from one, which is the Yoyito reel. I've gone a little bit heavier with that. It's all 6-pound nylon, so the tests were, you know, pretty accurate in that the gear I'm using on all of this stuff is the same. Range was a 4. Pack space with all the gear you need, yeah, it's pretty big. I gave that a 7. Why I gave that a 7? Because I'm looking at that pen rod there and I'm thinking that maybe takes up a little bit more space. I don't know. It is pretty heavy though. Yeah, I gave it a 7. Lifespan goes, that is gonna last pretty much forever. You know, this, well, I gave it a 2, which is one of the best because there's nothing gonna go wrong with it, you know. Skill to use effectively, I gave a 3 because it is very easy to use. Stealth, well, again, you've got to hold it out and you've got to throw with that hand or your other hand if you're left-handed. And when you're using it, obviously you're making pretty big circles, so you are going to be seen. It's not the easiest to put into your pocket, so I scored that as 6. Versatility got a much better score. I scored that at 3 because I can use pretty much any sort of bait or lure with this very easily and effectively. And strike ease, well, I don't know, it just seems to be in a good position, so you can strike pretty well with it. It just feels more natural with this than it does with some of the other hand lines. That scored a 4. So the total score for this was 42. We had the Yoyito hand reel. And this is a funny one because it's just not very natural to use this one. It just doesn't feel natural. It's beautifully made, but the ease of use isn't the best. Casting distance, pretty good. It's made beautifully. It's going to last forever. Let's get on to the scores. This cost me 54 quid, roughly. So I gave that a 7. Time it takes to catch fish, I gave a 5 because it's not the easiest to reel in. It's alright to get back out there, but quite often you miss the reel. It just doesn't feel as good as the aforementioned items that we've just taken a look at. Ease of playing fish. Now I find this one pretty difficult to play a fish on, and then a lot of people will just say, oh, just run backwards and drag the fish out. But if you're sitting tucked down on a bank side, it's difficult to do that, you know. You've got to try and play it on the reel, and that, again, that's what these things are designed for, you know. It's not easy to do that with this particular thing. If it was a little bit wider, that would make it easier. So I've scored that as 6. Casting distance is excellent with this. This was actually the second best. It's quite a big spool, and the way it's designed with this wonderfully manicured aluminium, the line absolutely flies off it. So I scored that a 2. With the gear necessary to catch fish, well, again, it scored pretty well with that. There's a very comprehensive kit in here, and that doesn't take up much space. So that was among the best. It scored a 3. Ban, well, basically, that is going to be around forever. So that scored top marks. I gave it a 1. Skill to use effectively, because of the unnatural position of holding it and the problem reeling back in because of that narrow reel, I scored that a 6. Bare reel. Concealment, well, you know, when you're using it, again, you've got that problem of having to throw it out and exposing yourself, and you've got the reeling in process, which again exposes yourself. But if you just wanted to slip this into a back pocket, it would easily fit in there. So it scored reasonably well for that. It scored a 4. Versatility goes, because of the problems of missing the reel when you're reeling it in, it doesn't do too well with spinners. It's okay for ledger, bait and floats. There are options out there, so I scored it a 6. And the ease of striking, again, because you've kind of got to go with both hands. Say when you're using a spinner and you feel a tug, you can't strike very easily with it. So I've scored that a 6 as well. The total for the Yoyito hand reel was 46. Is this little fella the 3D printed one, which may or may not be available? The cost of it was really low when I bought it, but I have seen similar sort of things since I bought this one at higher prices, so I've scored that a 2. Catch time, well, because this thing is so small and it takes you a long time to reel in, and it doesn't cast out perfectly because that's ridged there, you know, so you kind of cast it a long distance and bring it in quick. I've scored that a 7, so it did score towards the lower end. Likewise, ease of playing fish, because this thing's just so damn small, it is quite difficult to play fish on this, so I scored that a 7 as well. It doesn't cast anywhere near as far as most of these other options, so again that scored a 7. But pack space with gear, it scored 1, so got top marks for that. Likewise, the lifespan, apart from the cork possibly rotten at some point, which you could replace, that's going to last pretty much forever, it scored 3. Skill to use effectively, because it's so small, I gave that a 7, because it's not the easiest thing to use. Concealment goes, it is pretty small, so for short distances you don't really expose yourself when you're using it, and because again it's so small and narrow, you're not giving it big licks like that when you're reeling in. It's quite easy just to give it small hand movements, so again you're not exposing yourself, and that'll go in a front pocket or a back pocket, or again in any pocket. Well, on that it scored 2. Ability, you can use spinners on it, but because of the limited size you can't bring them back very easily, so that kind of limits you to fishing downstream in a current with the likes of a bladed spinner, which would, you know, get caught in the current and allow you to miss this a couple of times and still catch it before it hit the bottom. Float fishing, no problem, and ledger fishing on the bottom, again, no problem. So it scored reasonably well for that. It got a 5. Ease of striking, again, because this thing's so small, sometimes you end up with loose line and you might miss, and that's the time when the fish is going to take. Difficult to strike with it, so it scored a 7. Total score for this is 48. Onto the X-Reel from Exotac. Well, just feast your eyes upon that. It's absolutely beautiful. But unfortunately, beautiful doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to use, or that it'll catch fish better than the things that look pretty ugly. But I do like looking at this. However, the cost of this at roughly 90 English pounds is way more than anything else we've taken a look at. So for that reason, it scores 8, bottom of the pile. Catch time, well, because you've got a very narrow part of the reel there where the line sits, you miss all the time when you're bringing it in, especially if you're trying to use this with a spinner, which I wouldn't advise. It's difficult. It does require quite a lot of skill to use that, believe it or not. So the catch time score's pretty bad. I gave it a 6. Ease of playing fish on here, because this is the narrowest reel that we've got here, it's almost impossible to play a fish and land it on this, which devastates me because they put so much thought into here. I'll explain how they could easily rectify that fact at the end though. That really bums me out. It scored bottom there as well, 8. Cast distance, well, because it's so well machined, it does throw a long way, so it scored well, it got a 3. Pack space with all the gear you need, doesn't take up much space, and it holds a canny bit inside of there as well, so it scored well, it got a 4. Lifespan, well, you know, other than the rubber maybe snapping if you left it out in the UV light, or grit getting in here so you couldn't screw the top on properly, you know, nothing much can go wrong with this, but there is longer lived options out there. So for lifespan it scores a 4. Skill to use effectively, as I said before, this isn't the easiest thing to use because of that narrow reel, so it scores 8 for that. I class this one as the most difficult to use, and certainly the most difficult one to effectively catch fish on, which is a real bummer. Bottom of the pile for that as well, it scores at 8. Stealth, well, you know, it's no more or less stealthy than all the other hand reels that you point and throw out and then reel in, and it can be put into pretty much any pocket, so it scores reasonably well. I scored it 5. Well, because you just literally can't use this for spinners. It didn't score too well for that, so I rated it towards the bottom. It's got a 7. Ease of striking, I scored 8. Because it's so awkward to use, you tend to be out of touch with the line and often have spare line and end up gathering it up to try and put it back onto here. So consequently, often when you strike, you're not striking directly into the fish. I scored that one. Bottom of the pile again, it got 8. And this is going to shock a lot of people, you know, because that is, on the face of it, a really well designed hand reel. And it wasn't until I took all these criteria into consideration I realized that it's got problems, you know. They can be rectified though, which I'll mention at the end. Easily rectified as well, which would shoot this right up towards the top, if not the top. So watch out for that. Oh, the score, 61. Scored a much higher points total than anything else. Yeah. And that bums me out because just look at it, it's beautiful. What's next? Pen rod and fly reel. I do like using this, and I do like the ability to play the fish on a proper reel, because that means that the fish probably isn't going to get away, especially when you've got a bit of drag. You can let the reel do the work. You can cast a reasonable distance with this, even just by stripping line out and throwing it as you would with a centre pin reel. I do enjoy, really enjoy using this. Of this is pretty low, but it's not the cheapest. I think it was 10 to 12 pounds, so that scores a 4. Time it takes to catch fish, well, if you've got this thing set up, all you need to do is strip some line off, chuck it out, and you're pretty much fishing. And because you're using a reel, you tend not to lose the fish. You can bring it in quickly and effectively, and then you can get it back out again pretty quick as well. So for that, it scores a 2. Ease of use when playing fish, again, because you're playing it on a proper reel, it scores a 3. It's really easy to use. Cast distance isn't the furthest. In fact, a lot of these little Hobo hand reels will actually throw further. So for that, it scores a 6. Pack space with gear, well, there's smaller options available. So for that, it scores a 6. Lifespan, well, there's a lot that can go wrong with this cheap rod, and not so much with the reel, but the rod is a potential problem because it is very cheap, you know. So for that reason, it scores a 6. Skill to use effectively, well, once you've learned, or once you've been shown how to use this thing just by stripping line off and using like a center pin method, it's pretty easy to use. So for that reason, I've scored a 4. At basic skill, you will catch fish effectively. Concealment, this is bottom of the barrel. Not because it's small. I mean, you could slip that into one pocket and slip that into another pocket if you were stealth fishing. But because when you're pulling the line off, it goes wah, wah, wah. Anybody within 100 yards of you on a calm day is going to know you're there. So for that reason, it scores really low. Bottom of the barrel, 8. Versatility. Now I've scored this one a 2. And that might seem a bit strange given the nature of this reel, but that's because as long as you're using a spinner downstream, you can actually bring it back on the reel pretty quick. It's going to be a noisy process, but as long as you can chuck that spinner out far enough, you can use it on the reel. So you're not going to, say, miss when you're bringing something like that back. So it does okay with spinners, and obviously float, it's fine. And for ledger bait, again, it's also fine as well. So for that reason, it scores 2. Pretty good. And the ease of strike, well, it's a rod and reel. You're in contact with the line all the time when you're reeling it in, and because you've got the rod, you've got that higher point that's going to strike straight into the fish. It's very easy to strike with. so I scored it a 3. Total score 44 for the pen rod, or fake pen rod and fly reel. Telescopic rod and reel, one of the bigger options, in fact the biggest option once it's all put together, but I don't think I'll get any sort of arguments that it is the most effective. You know, obviously it's a proper rod and reel, or more or less a proper rod and a more or less proper reel, you know. It's the same as a proper rod and reel, just smaller. Cost, it's, you know, somewhere in the middle, so I scored it a 5. I think it was roughly 20 English pounds, whole kit. Catch time scores the best for that, because as long as you've got this set up, when you approach the water, you can cast a long distance, so you can cover a lot of fish. As soon as you strike into the fish, it strikes easily, because it's just the best to strike with. It's the best to play fish with, because you've got a proper reel. So for that reason, you can catch a lot of fish in a short space of time with this setup. Scores 1 for that. Ease of use whilst playing fish, I've scored that at 2, and you might be thinking, wait, hold on, this is like proper stuff, it should be a 1, but I'll explain why it isn't. There's something better, which you'll see in a minute. So it scored a 2. It's great for playing fish. If you hook a fish and it's well hooked, you know, once you've struck into it, chances are you're not going to lose it unless you're pretty inept, or the fish dives down and it wraps itself around a log or gets under a submerged rock or something, you know. Casting distance, this one easily casts the furthest, because you've got the best reel and you've got the 1 meter rod. I can get right to the other side of any part of my local river easily with this. So for that reason, it scores 1. Pack space with the necessary gear to catch fish, because it's the biggest of our options, it scores right at the bottom, which is an 8. Span, I've also given it an 8 as well. And this is just based on this particular rod, because it is so cheap. You know, I mean, some people will call it cheap and nasty. I don't think it's nasty, but I wouldn't argue that it's cheap. And the chances of something breaking on here are pretty, well, it's going to happen at some point. Never happened with me, and I've used this particular one probably for a couple of years on and off. But there's a lot can go wrong. The reel, I've actually lost the handle off the reel when I've been reeling in. Luckily, I found it both times, and when you lose the handle, that tends to just fall off, because you're so shocked that you've got, you know, you just drop it. And on the other side of the handle, on the other side of the reel, there's a nut, and that tends to drop out as well. So when you're using this, you've got to make sure that that handle is on tight and the nut is tight as well. I've lost the nut in the handle probably 2 or 3 times. I found it every time because the river's pretty clear, and it does just drop at your feet. But if you drop that in long grass or in mud or something, those bits are gone, and it renders this thing pretty much useless. So for that reason, it scores an 8 right at the bottom. How to use effectively? Well, because this is so effective, and it doesn't take much skill to use, once you've mastered the basics, you can catch a lot of fish very quickly with a limited amount of skill. So for that reason, it scores a 2. Stealth, well, you can't really conceal this very well unless you've got exceptionally big pockets. But when you're using it, it's pretty quiet. You know, there's really just the wrist movement to cast out and then reeling it in. That is not too bad as well. But because you just can't really conceal this thing as a stealth fisherman very well, I've scored it a 7. Versatility for fishing on the bottom, on the top, and with spinner, it scores top marks. It gets a 1 because it's a proper rod and reel. You know, you can use it for anything, and it's particularly good for spinning. Of striking, you'd expect this to be number 1, but it isn't. I scored a 2 because whilst it is exceptionally easy to strike using this, it's very natural. The next thing we're going to talk about does it automatically. So adding all of those up, including the 2 for the strike ease, it earns 37 points. So at the minute, that one is in the lead. Now lastly, but certainly not leastly, is that lad. And that is the Yoyito Handline. This is a one that you don't actively use it. You basically set it and leave it for the fish to pick the bait up, and then this will automatically strike. It'll automatically play the fish because this is spring loaded. But in fact, I'll do a full demonstration of this later in the video, so skip to that using the timestamps if you want to see exactly how this thing works before we give it the scores. Failing that, just catch up on that information at the end. Now for a single one, in the UK you'll pay roughly 9 or 10 English pounds. I've seen them in packs of 12 available for about £45, so that makes them, I don't know, £4 each. That is easily the cheapest of any of these options. So for that reason it scores a 1. Catch time. Well, because you basically set this thing, say on a night, you go away, you come back to find out if it's caught anything, the catch time is obviously the worst of any of these things we've taken a look at today. So for that reason it gets an 8. Ease of use for playing fish. Well, not only does it strike automatically, but it plays the fish automatically for you as well. So the fish is going to be absolutely knackered and just get dragged in. You don't have to do anything. So for that reason it scores 1. It's the very best. Casting distance, well, you've got probably about 4 meters of I don't know, polypropylene plasticky string on there, plus I've added another meter and a half of nylon, so you've got less than 5 meters, which I don't know, what would that be for you guys in the US, roughly 16 feet from here to your bait. That's as far as you can cast. Well, it's as far as you can set this thing, so for that reason it scores the lowest, so it gets an 8. Pack space with gear necessary to catch fish. Well, as you saw, you've got 2 of them in there. Scores really well for that. I've given it a 2. The lifespan, I've given a 7, because it is spring loaded, and if that spring goes, or this little setting pin in the top here drops out, or something fundamentally goes wrong with it, it renders it pretty much useless. So for that reason I've given it a 7. Still to use effectively, I've given it a 1, because once you're shown how to use this thing, that's it. You just set it, and well, you don't forget it, you've got to come back to it, but you set it, it does its job, you come back, you pick up your fish, and then you cook your fish and eat it. So for that reason I've given it a 1. Really exceptionally easy to use. As far as the stealth goes, for yourself, when you're setting it, obviously you may be seen when you're setting it, it does hang in a tree, so you may see the reel. That could be disguised though, so you could stealthily set it, you could leave it stealthily set, and then when you come to pick it up, it's just you at that situation again, and you're there, oh crap, okay, we've got a fish, take the fish, take the reel, and you're away. So for that reason it scores top marks, it gets a 1. When it's actually playing the fish, once it's caught it, you're not there. So even if somebody sees what's going on, you're not there, so it's not your problem. Versatility with regard to the different sort of baits and fishing methods that can be employed using this thing. Obviously, it's just a bait specific method of catching fish. The bait doesn't have to be a natural bait, it could be an artificial bait. So for that reason, you can't use it really with anything else. I've given it an 8, right at the bottom. However, the strike ease, because this thing strikes itself, I've given it a 1, because you don't have to do anything. You could be 10 miles away, and it would still just strike, play the fish, and catch it for you. Now this does have the added bonus that if you set it, say, we're probably not going to get this on film, but there's a kingfisher about 10 yards up the stream from me. Oh, balls. It's flown away. Not to worry. Now with the yo-yo reels, you do have the added bonus that it'll quite easily catch ducks as well, or even pheasants. Other sort of fowl, whether it be on terrestrial or whether it be in the water. If you set this along the margins with a big lobworm or a big beetle grub or something on, especially just before dusk, you'll get the ducks coming down, working the margins, and a duck will take that in, it'll automatically strike, it'll play the duck out for you, and then you can just come back and collect the duck. I would never advise setting it specifically for ducks, because obviously it's a pretty heinous, sketchy way to catch such a thing, but it can be done with these, so that is an extra bonus, especially in a survival situation, because there's a lot of meat on a duck. Likewise, if you're in the middle of a wood, leave this thing set with grains or something on the hook, pigeon, pheasant, partridge comes down, bam bam bam, strikes, catches it, plays it out, and worst case scenario, next to the morning it's still alive and it isn't knackered, it's flying all over the place, but it's tethered to this, you can still catch it and eat it. I regard that as a massive bonus, because it's so easy to do, set it and come back to it, you know. None of these other things you could do that with, really. The reel in total scores 38, placing it just behind the telescopic rod and spinning reel. Some may argue that the survival benefits of something like this, you know, it basically gives you time to do something else whilst it's catching fish for you, would outweigh whatever we've talked about. So from a survival point of view, that one is probably the best choice. As far as the scores on the doors go, first was telescopic rod and spinning reel, second was yo-yo reel, third K-bar Kaster, fourth was the Hobo Handline, tied with the pen rod with the fly reel, sixth was the Yoyito hand reel, was the 3D printed Hobo hand reel thing, and eighth, and really eighth, because of those things that I mentioned before, was the X-Reel from Exotac, which, as I said, it bummed me out. Here's how that could be rectified though. These fishing implements could be most easily altered by the manufacturer to make it so much better. That one, by a long way, the X-Reel from Exotac. If you just make this another half an inch bigger, you're gonna have probably a good inch and a half to wind the line back onto. That means you're gonna get a lot less misses. It's gonna hold more line. It's gonna hold more gear inside the hollow part of it. It's just a simple change, but it's gonna improve this thing so much more. And I mean, you could call it the X-Reel Plus. You could still do the small version, or you could do the bigger version. So if Exotac are watching, I would implore you to do that, you know. All you gotta do is make it half an inch bigger, half an inch fatter. That would shoot this pretty much towards the top, because I do like using this. It's just so frustrating to use because of that limited space for the line. That's a bummer. Please, Exotac, make a plus version just for me. I'll test it for you. I really want to see that improvement, because I do love this, but it just isn't as effective as these other things for catching fish. Now, other considerations to give to this gear is how easily can it be used if you were injured. For the reasons we've just gone through, the yo-yo reel came top. Giftability, you know, if you were giving this to a loved one or, you know, an associate, and you thought, you know, I really want something that looks good, either the X-Reel or the K-bar backpack caster. They're really giftable items, you know. So, in summary, for everyday use on rivers and little streams and so on, and also, you know, taking into account what you could conceal and use to catch fish in a bug-out survival situation, telescopic rod and spinning reel comes top. For stealth fishing, in streams and rivers, K-bar caster is the one I would advise going for. For a survival kit or bug out bag, set it, come back to it sort of scenario, yo-yo reel, easily the best for that. And the most easily improved by the manufacturer is the X-Reel into the X-Reel Plus. Come on Exotac, you've got to do that, you've got to do that. And in case you found it difficult to understand my ridiculous accent, everything I've talked about will be in the video description and in the pinned comment. Well, because it's the winter, let's try and catch a fish with this little spinning rod. And you'll notice that one has got proper rings on. There's a lot of these that have really crappy rings. I'll put the link to it in the video description. And by having the proper rings on, it allows me to leave the line set up with a swivel. Actually, it's not called a swivel, a snap link swivel. And that allows me just to quickly feed that up through those proper size rings. Grab a spinner, connect it on, and we're fishing. Little bugger, it got off. That's how quickly you can catch a fish on something like this. Second cast, second fish. This one's much better, so I won't fart about with this one. Oh, he's a beauty. Look at the size of that lad, eh? Forceps, always handy. Look at that. What a beauty, yeah? Big old brownies, a few good meals on him, but he's going back. Oh, oh. He's going back with a vengeance. That just shows you why this kit came out number one. You can cast accurately. You can use all manner of baits and lures. When you hook a fish, there's not much chance of it getting off. You heard the play, the drag. You know, it's just, well, it came out top. What more can I say? And that was a cracking fish. That's probably the best fish I've caught all year. Great stuff. Just give you a little bit of a close-up of the spinner. Again, I'll link to these in the video description, but that is a Fox Vibrax spinner. Very, very good. And that's how small that packs down, just for carrying about up and down the side of a river or stream. Well, that was a big success. So let's see how the yo-yo reel sets up. Behind me here, I've got a little waterfall coming down and a pool which is approximately 14 feet across, maybe 10 or 12 feet back to front, and anywhere up to about 2 feet deep. There is trout in it as well. I've seen a few dotting around. So this sort of scenario is perfect for the yo-yo reel. Now obviously we could just sit on the bank and fish here, but the chances of approaching such a pool without scaring the fish is very, very low. And that's where this lad comes in. Got a tree branch hanging down here. All we do, tie that on. Like so. Unravel our bait along with a little weight. And all we do, we just chuck that into a likely looking spot. Set the trigger on it. And that's it, it's set. As soon as the fish takes the bait, it pulls on here, trips the trigger, and it automatically reels in. And I'll just give you a close-up on that mechanism there. That's the reel itself. This is the bit that ties onto a tree. That would tie onto the tree. This fella would just hang down, and then off the end of here you've got approximately 4 meters of string and about 1.5 meters of nylon. A reasonably heavy weight there. Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's a heavy weight. You could go heavier if you wanted the bait to stay exactly where you dropped it. And then further down I've got an artificial grub. Of course, it would be better using something natural there. So as you can see, it's wanting to go back all the time. But on the top of here, I've got a little catch. You see the way it's just locked in? That's now set. See, it's not pulling in. As soon as the fish takes, watch what happens. So, there, see that lift up? I'll show you again. And then it reels in. It strikes automatically, it plays the fish automatically, and providing it's just a small fish, it'll drag it right to the bank for you. And that's a thing that could easily be set one-handed. So that's why these fellas make their way into my survival kits. And as I mentioned right back at the start, I use the Scouse method, so everything is made up. Eh? Eh? By wrapping that around, it just allows you to keep the bait, or should I say the hook, the line and the weight nicely held in there. That is tiny, you know, absolutely tiny. Now I think I'll make a specific video on these things at a later date, but you know, hopefully from that quick demonstration you can see how these work, because this was probably one of the only things mentioned in this video that I hadn't covered previously on the channel. But they are really, really good. Definitely check these out. So there you go. I hope you found this video useful, if exceptionally long, but I do go into great detail when I make my videos, because I make the videos that I would like to watch myself. There's a hell of a lot out there that are just superficial crap, you know, so hopefully what I've been talking about and demonstrating today has struck a chord and resonated with you. If it has, give it the thumbs up. Feel free to share the video wherever you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.